Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's true crime video. I'm so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day-to-day, today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the murder of 22-year-old Tiffany Salter at the hands of her then boyfriend, 24-year-old Todd Goff. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us, one of us, one of us. Alright, now that I'm done begging you to join my cult, we can go ahead and get into this video. Now, this video is on a case that was actually recommended to me by a member of the Brat Pack named Laura. Hi, Laura. Thank you, Laura. And Laura recommended this case to me because it's one that she has a personal connection to, because Laura actually went to school with both Tiffany and Tiffany's brother. Being close to something like this, especially at such a young age, can have lasting effects. It can stick with you. So it stuck with Laura. And in reading about what happened to Tiffany, it stuck with me too. To see that she was killed at such a young age, and then to see that she had went through years of trauma prior to that, really broke my heart and stuck with me. So Laura was actually kind enough to help me get in contact with some of Tiffany's family members, and I was able to speak to both her little sister and her father in preparation for this case, and they helped me get a better understanding of what happened from their point of view, because I think that is very important, because the people who are most affected by these horrible crimes are the ones that are left to deal with the aftermath. You know what I mean? They're the ones who are picking up the pieces. They're the ones whose lives are destroyed after somebody they love's life is ended. So I was able to speak to them, and I was able to find out about who Tiffany was, not just in her death, but also in her life, which is very important. So please keep that in mind while watching, and of course while commenting, because the family will probably watch this. I told her father that I will send him a link once the video goes live, and if they're watching this, there's a good chance that they'll go through the comments. So make sure to leave all the love and positivity you can, because this family has already been through so much. And it was so heartbreaking when talking to Tiffany's father. His name's John, by the way, because he said that he was surprised that I wanted to cover Tiffany's case, and he didn't know if people would really want to hear her story, because it's not a mystery and it was not a whodunit. And that broke my heart to hear. And I just really want him and his family to see that people do care, that we do care, and that we do care about Tiffany. So now I'm going to tell you the entire story. I read all the things so that you do not have to, and at the end of this video I want you to answer the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as we go through the details, but of course I want you to answer once you have something to go on. But the question of the day is this. Well, actually I have two. 1, do you believe that the sentencing in this case was justice? And 2, do you believe that Todd Goff deserved a new trial? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. And now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the murder of 22-year-old Tiffany Salter at the hands of her then boyfriend, 24-year-old Todd Goff. Our story begins with a 911 call, as a lot of our stories do, and this 911 call was coming in from a woman named Joanne. It was about 7 a.m. on July 7, 2012, and Joanne was telling police that she had just got off a very disturbing phone call. She said that she had been on the phone with her son, this was Todd Goff, and that Todd had told her that he and his girlfriend, Tiffany, had been in a fight. They had been fighting, and they had started choking each other, and that he thought he had killed her. Police then head over to the 4400 block of Reynolds Street in Hephzibah, Georgia, and find the body of a young girl in a wooded area behind the home, and she was next to 15 to 20 feet away from what appeared to be a freshly dug grave and a long shovel. This girl had bruising on her neck, she had lacerations on her head, and she appeared to have been dragged through the dirt at some point because she had marks on her body and dirt on her body. And this was 22-year-old Tiffany Salter, and she had been murdered by her boyfriend. Now, who was Tiffany? Tiffany Nicole Salter was born on November 6, 1989, which is crazy because when I was initially looking into this case, I didn't realize it, but we are almost exactly a year apart to the day. So it's weird to look at that and think of where her life could have been if it didn't end so tragically. And sadly, her life began just as tragically as it ended. Like, Tiffany was born prematurely, and she was born prematurely to a mother who had a problem with addiction. And so as soon as, they, whoever they are, realized this, Tiffany was not able to go home with her mother. She actually wasn't able to go home with either of her birth parents for the first year of her life. But her father, John, did everything he could and put in all the work he could to get custody of his daughter. Initially, Tiffany had been put into the custody of her biological mother's adoptive parents, because I guess her biological mother was adopted when she was younger. So Tiffany was put into the custody of these grandparents, and her father said that they were great people, like that was great, but he wanted custody of his daughter. So he would make the 12-hour drive, because Tiffany was in Florida, he would make the 12-hour drive all the way to where she was to make sure he was at every court date. And eventually, after about a year, just a week before Tiffany's first birthday, he was awarded full custody of her. So with that, Tiffany and her brother Michael were then raised alone by their father. This was John Michael Salter. So it was just Tiffany, Michael, and John for a long while until eventually he remarried. This was a woman named Karen who had 2 children of her own, a daughter and a son. And once the 2 were together, they went on to have their own baby together. This was a little girl who was born, and her name was Bonnie. This is the sister that I talked to in preparation for this video, and she was 8 years younger than Tiffany. Tiffany was said to be one of the most loving children you'd ever meet. She was polite, she was reserved, she was giving, but she was a little shy. She was a little bit of a shy girl. Michael was like super outgoing, and Tiffany was a little more, introverted and reserved. But despite that, despite them having like opposite personalities, they were as close as any siblings could ever get. She was a bright and beautiful person and said to have a fighting spirit from the moment she took her first breath. She grew into a young woman that loved to laugh and be silly and help others, the type of person that, quote, left her fingerprints on the hearts and souls of everyone she knew, end quote. And Tiffany had a loyal heart and loved her family and friends, and she loved them from like the very core of her being. Tiffany was just silly and clumsy, with her sister saying that Tiffany was one of the clumsiest people you would ever meet. And she was just a young, smart girl with her whole life ahead of her, with a love of animals and the dream to one day be a veterinarian so that she could be around and help animals all day. Like, she loved animals so much that she one time had a pet deer, which, how do you get a pet deer? Sign me up. And she named this deer Rambo. In middle school, she really started to come into her own, and she was truly beautiful. If you look at photos of her, it's insane. She was really naturally beautiful, but she also really liked doing her hair and really liked doing her makeup. And despite the fact that she was so pretty and all of the, boys in school were interested in her, she didn't really have boyfriends growing up. The guys were too intimidated to talk to her, which was kind of ironic because she, if they had talked to her, they would learn that she was super shy. She was insecure, she was sweet, a little naive, and she had no idea just how coveted she actually was. So Tiffany kept her circle kind of small. She dealt with a little bit of bullying in high school, and so she really only had 2 close friends. And this was Kimber, a girl named Kimber, and her brother Michael. And her brother were so close. Every photo I looked at them, you could really tell that they were best friends, and they were together all the time. So it was really hard for Tiffany when her brother ended up leaving home. He enlisted in the Marines and he started going to boot camp, and it's around this time that things started to go downhill for Tiffany. And I don't think it's just because her brother left. It seems like her life, a lot of things happened at once. Her brother went off to the Marines, and that would be difficult for her considering how close they were. But then home life kind of got turned upside down because her father and her stepmother separated, and everything was just kind of in a period of transition. And she's dealing with bullying at school, and it's right around this time that she actually meets her future boyfriend, and this was Todd Goff. Now, around the time that she starts dating Todd is also when she's starting high school, and she's not really enjoying it. Many kids wish they didn't have to go to high school. I know I did. So here she is, having to go to school, which she does not like. She's dealing with bullying. It's not something she's into, and she's dating this new guy who's homeschooled, and she's like, oh, I wish I could do that. So she actually just starts ditching school a lot. She starts skipping class all the time so that she can go and be with Todd, and she does. She stays with him all day. And if she hadn't ditched school to go and hang out with him, as soon as she would get off of school on the days that she actually would go, Todd would just pick her up and immediately take her with him. So she was with him all of the time. So this is happening, and then it all kind of comes to a head when Tiffany was 16 years old. And this is when her and her father get into a little bit of an argument. He finds out all the stuff that's going on. He finds out that she's been ditching school, which is so crazy to me because apparently she ditched 25 days in a row before the school contacted him and told him this had happened. So she had been ditching school. She wanted to stay out all night, typical dumb teenage stuff. So they talk, it becomes an argument. She tells him that she wants to run away. And he's like, well, if you run away, where are you going to go? She's like, I'm just going to go and stay with Todd. His mom already said that I can live there if I want to. So the next day she does. She chooses to leave home. She goes and she stays with Todd, and she's just staying there a couple days, and eventually it just turns into her living there full time. So she leaves home. She moves in with Todd and Todd's mother, and shortly after that, she just drops out of school altogether. Now, once Tiffany was out of her family's home and living with Todd, it's very clear in hindsight that this was a controlling and abusive relationship. To look at this from the outside with no, emotional involvement, at least I didn't have emotional involvement when I first started looking into this case, it seems obvious, right? We look into these cases, we see domestic violence all the time, and this is all the telltale signs, all the red flags of domestic violence. It started with isolation, right? She is with him all the time. She ends up moving in with him. She drops out of school so she can be with him all the time. And then it goes into him screening her calls. Him and his mother would monitor and screen Tiffany's calls. On the rare occasions that Tiffany's family was able to speak to her, they would have to speak to him first, or she would have to talk to her family on speakerphone so that he could hear the call at the same time. So that's already bad. That's already super weird, right? But then there was the fighting. They fought all the time. And even though her family wasn't there to see the fights, they knew it was happening because Tiffany would start to call them. She would call them, tell them that they had gotten in a fight, ask her family, ask her father to come and get her and bring her back home. So on more than one occasion, on several occasions, he would get in his car, his vehicle, truck, car, his vehicle. He would start driving over to go and get her, but before he would even get there, she would call back and be like, no, it's okay, Dad, don't worry, I'm gonna stay. And John said that this happened all the time. Sometimes it would be once a week, sometimes it would be once a month, but it was a pattern. It was happening over and over. So we have the isolation, we have the monitoring of the phone calls, we have the fighting, and now we have him just cutting her off from her family altogether, not even letting her go to her own grandmother's funeral or meet her brother's kids, the brother she was so close with. He literally wouldn't even allow her to have her own Facebook page. For 7 years, Todd controlled every aspect of Tiffany's life. And it wasn't just him beating her down emotionally, but he was also beating on her physically. At the time of her death, Tiffany's body was covered in bruises and abrasions in various stages of healing, which showed that this was happening often and was happening for a long time. In one instance, less than a year before Tiffany was killed, the police were called to the house because Todd and Tiffany had gotten into a fight. And apparently the fight had gotten so bad that Todd had thrown Tiffany into like a staircase where she got a giant gash in her head. Todd was charged with family violence battery, but the case didn't end up going anywhere because, as we often see in cases of domestic violence, Tiffany told police that she was not going to help them prosecute Todd. So this case ended up being on the, quote, dead docket, which essentially means that, quote, the prosecution is postponed indefinitely, but may be reinstated at any time at the pleasure of the court. So they were like, we can't do anything yet, but don't worry, we might change our mind and we might do something with or without you, but they didn't end up doing anything. And I know some states have laws, I think even in California there's a law where if there's a domestic violence call, somebody's being taken away that night, but in this situation, I guess that wasn't the case. It's just heartbreaking because it seems like it was getting worse, and it seems like part of her wanted to leave, but then you could see that part of her felt like she needed to stay. Like, that part breaks my heart. Like, for example, Bonnie told me a story about a time when Tiffany had called her and her friend to come and pick her up. She's like, okay, let's go. And Bonnie and I believe her friend Kimber had driven over to go and pick her up. And when they got there, her and Todd were fighting, and Todd like put her in, it was Kimber's car, and was like, take her, get her out of here. I don't want to be with her anymore. And Tiffany was hysterical. She was crying. She didn't want to leave him. She wanted to be with him. So she was devastated that he was trying to get rid of her. And that breaks my heart. But she was going to leave, right? They start driving away. They're taking her away. They're going to leave. But then Todd changes his mind and he ends up chasing Kimber down and like driving her off the road and taking Tiffany back out of the car and taking her back to the house. It's just heartbreaking because she was losing herself. She was transforming into a different person before her family's eyes, and they couldn't do anything about it. Like, she started drinking. She hadn't been like a big drinker before, but Todd was a huge drinker. He even had a liver issue. So Tiffany started drinking, and she told her sister that she started drinking so much initially because Todd had this liver problem. So she was drinking his alcohol so that he wouldn't have a chance to drink it because she cared about him so much. And I think part of her had to believe that he cared about her a lot. He said he cared about her a lot, but did he really? Would we be talking about this today if he did? I don't think so. And in another story that I was told by Bonnie, Tiffany and Todd had been driving Todd's mom's car. and he had gotten into a car accident. He had wrapped it around a tree, and he fled the scene. He fled the scene of the accident, leaving Tiffany there with a broken pelvis. He was like, sorry, I gotta go, and just left her there. It's just so sad. Her family had to see her with bruises, black eyes. She was always sad and crying. And in one report, somebody said that they even saw her with a tooth knocked out, like half of her tooth was broken off. And her family think that she was beginning to see that she needed out. Tiffany's aunt said that she thinks that the reason that Tiffany was killed is because she was starting to see that she needed to leave. She needed to get out of that situation. And Todd, realizing that he was going to lose control over her, caused him to flip out and murder her. And her aunt isn't the only person who thinks this. Her best friend Kimber said the same thing. She said that in the time before she was killed, Tiffany had actually started to reach out more. She had actually been wanting to get together. And Kimber had seen Tiffany over the years, but anytime she had, Todd had been right there for all of the hangouts. He had to be with her at all times. But now she was wanting to hang out alone. And this was a big deal because in the years, I think it was 7 years, that Tiffany was gone and living with Todd, Bonnie, her sister, had only seen her 4 times. And now all of a sudden she was wanting to go out, she was wanting to see people, she was wanting to socialize, and this was a huge change. And though it was exciting to see her, it was also very hard to see her because in seeing her in person, you could really see how much being with Todd had just completely changed her. It seems like the defeat inside of her was oozing out because she just looked so destroyed. She was covered in bruises, missing half that tooth with the black eyes. She had matted hair. She didn't seem to care about how she looked anymore. She was completely broken, and she was scared to talk about this with her friends and family. The executive director of Safe Homes in Georgia, this was a woman named Amy, she spoke in an article about this, saying what we know here, and that is that this was the most dangerous time for Tiffany, the time where she wanted to leave. Abusers have a big thing in common, and that is their need for control, right? That's why they do the things they do. At first, the isolation feels like affection. They want you all to themselves and to nobody else, but then it builds over time, and the isolation turns to intimidation and threats. And Amy said of this quote, "They break you down before they beat you up," end quote. And then sometimes they murder you. And that is what happened to Tiffany. And so let's get into what happened that day. So police received this call from Joanne, Todd's mother, at around 7 a.m. They head right over to the home and they find Tiffany unresponsive in the wooded area in the back of the house where Tiffany and Todd lived with Todd's mother. Though Todd's mother wasn't there at the time because what I had heard was that she was actually staying at a hotel because Todd had been physically abusive with his mother as well. So naturally when police get there, they want to talk to everybody at the scene, and there were at least 2 people there, Todd and his brother Ray. Apparently Todd's brother Ray was one of the first people on the scene. He was there even before the police had gotten there, and he said that he got there and his brother Todd led him to where Tiffany's body was, and that Ray says that he started to try to perform CPR because he didn't know how far gone she was at this time, and that while he did this, Todd was hysterical, screaming, crying, losing his mind. Ray said this was very difficult and very overwhelming because he had known Tiffany. I mean, she had been in their family for 7 years, and now here she was, dead in the backyard with a grave next to her, a shovel, and this bottle of iced tea. And when I was initially reading the reports about this, I was like, why is there a bottle of iced tea out there? But in talking to John, Tiffany's father, he told me his theory on it, and it makes total sense to me. He said that he believes that Todd fully intended to bury Tiffany in the yard that day and hope that he could hide what he had done. But that when he went out there and started trying to dig in the woods, he didn't realize how difficult this would be because there's roots and trees and rocks and it's hard earth, and he, had never done that kind of thing in his life. This generation doesn't do things like this. We don't play in the woods. We're not digging in the woods. So he got exhausted. He's drinking this tea, wearing himself out, having no idea what to do. And once he realized, I'm not going to be able to bury her out here. I don't have the skills to do this. That's when he decided to call his family. That's when he called his mom. That's when his brother showed up. So Ray tries to save Tiffany. It doesn't work. Police arrive, and reportedly Todd begs them to try to save her too, but it is unsuccessful. So she was pronounced dead at 7:20 that morning. So when police are finally able to speak to Todd, one of the first things they notice is that he has scratches on his body, on his neck and chest area. And they look at it and they're like, where'd those scratches come from, guy? And he says oh, they're totally unrelated. They have nothing to do with this. These scratches came from a previous fight with Tiffany days ago. And police are kind of like, Okay. Don't really believe you, but okay. What has happened here? What's going on? Now, he tells police something very different than he told his mother, because to recap, he told his mother that he and Tiffany had been arguing, that she had started choking him, and that in response, he turned the tables on her, he started choking her, and that they're choking each other until she becomes unresponsive. And then, he called his mom to tell her that he was freaking out because he thought she wasn't breathing, and instead of, his mother coming to help him, which is I think what he thought was going to happen, she called the police. But this isn't what he's telling police. He tells police there was no fight. There was no altercation at all today. Everything was cool between them. That actually, instead, the two had been physically intimate in the room, you know what I'm saying? And that they had been choking each other for fun, and that he had accidentally killed her. But then he changed his story again, and he said that there was no fight, there was kind of an argument, but no physical fight, and that Tiffany ran off into the woods by herself, and that 15 minutes later he went off to look for her, and he just found her dead, but had no idea how it happened. But then, still, he told his brother something else. He told his brother that the two had just been playing, and that this was an accident, and he had no idea how this could happen. So Todd, his story, is all over the place. Now, Todd was arrested, but not before a scuffle took place. Like, he fought with the cops. He really did not want to be arrested, and that's probably because he knew what this was like. He had been through this process before. Apparently, Todd had a bit of a record from charges for things like marijuana possession, obstruction, battery, and family violence battery. And he was even on probation at the time of the murder, but his mother had bailed him out. He was arrested, but he wasn't actually charged with Tiffany's murder right away. They were waiting for the crime lab in Atlanta to perform the autopsy so that they could figure out what was going on. Because they had an idea of what had happened, but they couldn't be sure, so they hadn't charged him yet. So he was held in the Richmond County Jail awaiting the autopsy results. Now, it did not take long for these results to come in and for them to change their mind, and he was officially charged with murder once it was determined that Tiffany's cause of death was strangulation, and so the manner of death was homicide. So with that, he was charged with Tiffany's murder, and initially he was held on a $50,000 bail. Now, the DA tried to oppose the bond. They said that he shouldn't have the bond because he had a level of rage in him that would allegedly cause him to, strangle his girlfriend to death with his bare hands. But his attorney was like, listen, there's no risk of him leaving. He can't afford to leave. He's not going to run. He also can't tamper with any witnesses because there aren't really witnesses for him to tamper with. You know what I'm saying? There's not going to be him leaving. There's not going to be witness tampering. So let's just give him some bond. And ultimately, the judge did decide to give him bond. Now, Tiffany's family, dude, was devastated to lose her. And what happened for them that morning is that a call came in to Tiffany's father, John, at about 7:30 in the morning. And this was coming from a family friend who owned a local shop that was about a mile away from the home where Tiffany and Todd lived. So she calls Tiffany's father, John, and is like, hey, there are cops everywhere. Like, all over near where Tiffany and Todd live, there are cops. They're blocking off the street. There's something going on. You might want to get over there. So Bonnie, Tiffany's little sister, was a teenager at this point, and she was left at home, and Grandma, I believe, was going to come and pick her up and take her over to her house. So she waits. She gets picked up by Grandma. She goes to Grandma's house, and John and I believe Karen drive over to see what's going on with Tiffany and Todd. So John gets in his vehicle, he drives over to the area, and the street that he turned down, like the first street he turned down, was a street that ran directly behind the home, the property where Tiffany and Todd lived. And he didn't get more than 200 feet down this road before he was stopped by police because he was unknowingly driving into a crime scene. And it's so sad because he stopped and he can see his daughter's body. She's laying like at the wood line covered with a sheet, and he can see her. So he's there. They tell him what happened, and he is about to burst. He freaks out. He has his gun on him at the time, and he's asking cops like where Todd is because he wants to go and fucking kill him. Rightfully so. I cannot even imagine being in that position, and he has to be restrained by the cops, and his gun has to be taken away. He just lost it, and he couldn't do anything. They wouldn't even let him see his daughter, but he refused to leave. He would not leave until they had taken his daughter away from that home. John and Karen then drove to Bonnie, who was at her grandma's house, and had to tell her the news. And she said she knew something was wrong right away. She knew something was wrong when nobody would tell her what was going on, and then definitely knew something was wrong when her mother was driving her father's car, because that was something that just never happened. So they sit her down, and they tell her that her sister is gone, and she just loses it. She freaks out, she screams, she grabs her dad and just holds him as tight as she can. Which, her dad was devastated, dude. She said that her father went from periods of tears to rage, and that in her life, She had never before this seen her father cry except one time, and that's when his own mother died. And now he was completely just falling apart. He was her rock. He was her hero, and now she was watching him crumble right before her eyes. And she said specifically of this quote, "I remember not only seeing, but hearing my father's heartbreak. He cried himself to sleep night after night." When Tiffany was murdered, her brother Michael was deployed overseas with the Marines, and her father John had to be the one to call and tell Michael that his sister, who he was clearly so close with, was gone. He was never going to see her again, and John said this was the hardest call he had to make. Then after that, the family just had to wait for Michael to get home so that they could start making arrangements for her funeral. And when her funeral did take place, it was completely packed. There were people everywhere, all wearing purple ribbons for Tiffany, and there were so many people there that there was not even a place to stand. Person after person cycled through, all shaking John's hand and expressing their condolences, and even Tiffany's biological mother made an appearance, who previously hadn't had, I don't believe, any involvement in her life. To deal with that, to deal with all of that, and then to have to deal with the shittiness of the public sometimes. Because while researching this case, before I even got into contact with Tiffany's family, I found this post on Facebook from a page called The Jail Report. I think it's just like a Facebook page that reports on news, like crime in the area that Tiffany lived, and they had made a post about her murder. And in this post, they used, Todd's mugshot, right? But they also used a mugshot of Tiffany instead of like any other photo of her. And I found it to be so absolutely disrespectful. And then on top of that, there were the shittiest comments. I read through, I saw the shittiest comments. And then I saw that there were family members in the comment section, like having to defend their loved one, having to defend themselves. It is just so disgusting and heartbreaking. I just can't imagine what that would be like, to see those shitty comments and feel like you have to defend yourself, feel like you have to say something because people are so victim blamey. It's just disgusting. But let's keep that in mind for this comment section too. I don't really see that being a problem because most of you are really chill, but it's a public forum. People can cycle in from anywhere. People who just stop by, have never been here before, say something shitty and go about their way, because sometimes people just are shitty. That's just the truth, isn't it? But anyway, they're dealing with this. And then they're dealing with the fact that this guy is given bail. He has the potential to get out. I cannot even fathom what that would be like. Thankfully, though, he did not end up making bond. I guess this is because the sheriff wanted the bond paid in cash, which I did not know was a thing you could do. I don't know a lot about bond, to be fair, just in general. So he didn't end up making bond, so he spent about a year in jail before the court actually ended up revoking his bond anyway. The prosecution filed a motion saying that the bond should be revoked because Todd had proven himself to be like a menace and a violent person, because he had actually gotten into like several altercations while in jail awaiting trial. Now, his attorney tried to counter that, saying that the disciplinary reports that were issued were not about him being violent against other inmates, but instead him talking about harming himself, because he did claim to have suicidal thoughts prior to and after the murder, and that in addition to that, the other things were just minor infractions. And the defense actually claimed that the prosecution had only filed their motion now because they had found out that Todd's family had actually made the money and he was about to get out. So that's their counter. But in the end, the judge did decide to revoke the bail, make it so he could not get out because of, one, the altercations in jail, the disciplinary report in jail, and also the fact that Todd had not undergone any sort of psychological evaluation yet, and the judge didn't feel confident that it was safe for homeboy to be getting out of jail in the first place. Like, how do we know that he is safe to be released? Now, legal. The trial began in 2014, and I'm sure you can imagine, as I am sure you can imagine, Todd pled not guilty to all of his charges, but the defense was having an interesting go. That's not a good sentence. The defense was trying something interesting, in my opinion. They were not trying to say that Todd didn't kill Tiffany. They were like, there's no question about who did it. Todd definitely did it. Sure, we know he did it. The question is why. The question is intent. By this time, Todd had changed his story again. He changed his tune. This time he was saying that the two had been drinking. It was a day of drinking that turned into a full night of drinking, and that they had gotten into a fight, that they had gotten into an argument, and it was Tiffany, not him. Tiffany started choking him. Okay, she attacked him, and then in response he started choking her because he had to defend himself, and then it went too far, and then he accidentally killed her. His attorney was arguing that because her death was committed during the commission of battery, the crime he had committed was actually involuntary manslaughter, not murder. Now, it was weird, but like, in my opinion, I think Todd's mom kind of lied for him a little bit, to be honest. Like, I don't know if it was intentional or denial or her really not remembering things properly, but like, for example, she, on the stand, said that even though she told police when she called that Todd had confessed to choking Tiffany and said nothing about the self-defense thing, nothing like that, that Todd never actually said that to her. That this was just a conclusion she came to herself, that he never admitted to doing this, that she was just hysterical and confused, and then she was like, I should be up there instead of him. Like, it did feel like she was really trying to protect her son. She also told the court that she was having trouble remembering certain things, but one of the things she could remember is that for about 5 weeks prior to the murder, she noticed that Tiffany seemed weird. She seemed different, and that Joanne, Todd's mom, noticed that her son had marks on him, scratches on him, marks on his neck, and that she would ask her son like what these were, and he would tell her just not to worry about it. Now, even though she was saying she didn't remember things, and that she was saying that Todd had, never confessed to choking Tiffany. He had never said he choked Tiffany, which, like, that's not in dispute, so I don't know why she's even saying that. Even though she was saying she came to these conclusions on her own. Her 911 call had been recorded, and this recording was played in court, and it completely contradicted what she was saying on the stand. In this recording, she told police that her son told her that he and Tiffany were fighting, that he had started choking her, and that, he said, it was an accident, but I think she may be dead. Now, during this entire trial, most of Tiffany's family stayed in the courtroom. During the medical examiner's testimony about what she went through, them saying she was strangled, them talking about the number of bruises and abrasions she had, that there were new ones and old ones, bruises on her arms, legs, chest, and back, and then a large bruise on the side of her head. This showed that she had been hurt for a while. They heard it all, they saw it all, the autopsy photos, all that. I cannot imagine seeing somebody you love in that state. Her father said it was horrible, unimaginable to see his daughter on what he referred to as this 9-foot screen, nude for everyone in the court to see. Like, the trauma of that. She was this tiny, little, short, 100-pound girl who was murdered by a guy who stood a foot taller than her, but was claiming that she was somehow a threat to him. The prosecution ended by telling the jury, listen, it would have taken 6 to 10 seconds for Tiffany to lose consciousness. So for that time, Todd was looking into her eyes and watched her go unconscious. And if he had stopped there, she may still be alive, but he didn't. And then the DA said specifically, quote, not every homicide is a murder, but in this case, it is. As for the defense, they asked that the jury simply find Todd guilty of involuntary manslaughter. They said that he was not trying to escape responsibility or punishment, but that he never intended to kill Tiffany. He loved her, and at every turn, he has shown remorse for his crime. But it was pointed out during this trial that remorse is not a defense for a murder. So the jury was sent to deliberate, and the options they had to choose from of things they could find him guilty of was murder, voluntary manslaughter, or involuntary manslaughter. So those are their options. So they go. They deliberate, and they come back, and they find Todd Goff guilty of malice murder and felony murder. So now it was just the sentencing, and Tiffany's friends and family were finally going to have a chance to give their victim impact statements. And there were a bunch of people there who wanted to speak. Bonnie, her sister, was going to speak, and she had practiced and written down over and over what she wanted to say. And when she went up there to give her victim impact statement, she also brought a drawing that she had made when she was a child, that she had made for Todd, where she had drawn it for him and asked him to take care of her big sister. John, her father, never spoke. He's never spoke to Todd since this happened. He said that he didn't think there was a thing that he could say to Todd in that scenario that wouldn't result in him freaking out and having his own hands around this guy's throat. He said that he wanted to leave this courthouse with his dignity, and even though he had a lot to say, this was not the place to say it. So he let everybody else be his voice. To this day, he has not spoken to Todd once since Todd killed his daughter, and to this day he does not forgive. He instead wants 5 minutes alone with the guy so that he can do what he needs to do. And I've said this a bunch of times, that to me that is relatable and understandable, because I see families all the time who are like, I forgive, like that's good, they let it go. And I'm always amazed that anyone can do that. It's a huge thing to do, and it's not something everybody could do. It's not something that I think I could ever do, and it's not something that John could do. He doesn't forgive, and he wants Todd to no longer exist. Todd did speak in a sentencing hearing. He did not, by the way, testify at his trial. He was actually advised by his attorney not to testify at trial, because if he testified, he'd be open to cross-examination, and his attorney felt like Todd had some questions that he wouldn't have some very good answers for, and that it wasn't going to make him look good to be on the stand. But at the sentencing, it didn't really matter, right? He was already found guilty, so he did speak, and at this time, he used the opportunity to apologize to Tiffany's family, saying, quote, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean for this to happen. It happened so quick, it didn't seem real. I'll never forgive myself." With that, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The life sentence was for malice murder, and the felony murder was vacated by, quote, "operation of law." The judge said when passing down the sentence that there were no winners in the courtroom that day. This gave this family some sort of resolution, right? The door was at least closed so that they could work on trying to heal. I guess during the verdict, Bonnie was sitting right beside her father. She hadn't been in the courtroom through the entirety of the trial because she was a little bit young to be seeing things like that, hearing things like that. But during the verdict, they were sitting beside each other. And she says when the verdict was read, she felt all the tension finally leave her father's body and thought that this moment was like the one moment of peace he had had in years. So now they could work on moving forward. It's not closure, because closure doesn't really exist in something like this, but it's the closest they're going to get to that so they can start healing. Tiffany's sister Bonnie said that she wished Todd had to sit in a cell with a beautiful picture of Tiffany with her bright smile on every single wall. She said that she just didn't understand how he could look in her eyes, say he loved her, and do this to her. Bonnie also said that there is no way that this was mutual abuse like the way the defense tried to play it, that there was no, Tiffany wouldn't hurt anyone. She wouldn't hurt a fly. She would never put her hands on Todd unless it was in self-defense. So he's in jail. And you'd think that that's it, that the case is done, that the video is coming to a close. But if you look at the runtime, you see that we're still going here. And that is because, as I'm sure you can guess, Todd appealed his conviction. Basically, his defense team, which this is a new defense team by this time, he gets new attorneys, they're appealing his conviction based on 3 different points. 1, Todd being advised not to testify at trial. 2, his attorneys not asking for a mistrial when it was revealed during trial that he had been on probation at the time of the murder. And 3, his booking photo not being admitted as evidence and shown to the trial. Basically, he and his defense team now were claiming that he had ineffective counsel that didn't bring evidence forward that could have gotten him a manslaughter conviction instead of a murder conviction. So basically what happened here were a few things, but let's start with the probation issue. So apparently when Joanne, Todd's mother, had spoken to police and it was recorded, she said during this recording that the day before, she had taken Todd to see his probation officer. Now the defense obviously didn't want this played because they felt like this could prejudice the jury towards Todd. So the state promised that when it was played at trial, that part would be redacted so the jury wouldn't hear it. But when it was played, it wasn't redacted. The defense attorney objected immediately, and there was even talk at that point of a mistrial, but his attorney decided to withdraw his objection, and the mistrial did not happen. Next were the issues of him testifying in trial and his booking photo being admitted, and these sort of go hand in hand. Basically, his new defense team is saying that if this photo was admitted at trial, it would have shown that at the time he was arrested, he had scratches and marks on his own throat. And if this was shown and he could show that he was scratched and attacked that day, it could show he was provoked. And if he was provoked, he could have been convicted of a lesser crime. Same goes for him testifying at trial. If he had testified at trial, he could have told his side of the story, which would have been him saying he was provoked. Again, if he was provoked, he could have been convicted of a lesser crime. Cool, you get it. Now, the reason his initial attorney didn't do these things wasn't because he was incompetent or because he didn't know what he was doing. It was strategic. He said, his attorney was like, listen, the burden of proof is not on the defense. We don't need to prove he didn't do it. The prosecution needs to prove that he did. And his attorney believed that if Todd was put on the stand, he would have to answer questions. Okay, back up. If Todd was put on the stand, he'd be subject to cross-examination, which means he'd be asked questions that his attorney didn't think Todd would have good answers for. He also said that in his attempt to sort of question, like a trial run of it, he didn't think Todd looked very good on the stand. He didn't think it was a good idea. His attorney even told Todd, dude, by all accounts, you were incredibly aggressive and confrontational with the officers when you were arrested, and You said at the time you were arrested that those scratches and marks on your neck were from an older altercation, that they weren't from that day. So they would use your own testimony against you. So it just didn't look good, and his attorney believed that they had enough to get him a lesser conviction without putting him on the stand or admitting the photo. They were like, listen, all you're going to do is damage yourself. We have enough. We don't need to do that. With that said, after being in prison for 5 years, a now 30-year-old Todd Goff was granted a new trial. So they were going to have to go through this all over again. And his new defense attorneys were hoping that they could get him a conviction for manslaughter instead of malice murder, so he at least had the opportunity to be paroled one day. The trial court reasoned that no competent attorney would have failed to call Todd to testify because Todd's testimony was indispensable to prove the serious provocation that is needed to support a voluntary manslaughter verdict. Now, this is what Todd said happened now that would have caused this, serious provocation that would lead to him, strangling her to death. He said that he and Tiffany had gotten into a fight in the backyard of their house and that the fight became physical, and that Tiffany escalated the fight by grabbing his throat and his downstairs region, like one hand, and called him a stupid motherfucker, which, to be honest, sounds like a pretty accurate description of him anyway. But moving on. He said in response to this, in response to her grabbing him like this, he then grabbed her throat, and that the two then went back and forth with him squeezing harder, her squeezing harder, until eventually Tiffany went limp. Now, if you're curious about that small grave that was next to her in the backyard, I was too. And Todd said that this grave was never intended for Tiffany. This grave was actually dug to bury a dog of theirs who had died previously. But it's worth noting that I never saw anything else about this dog. I looked into it, I didn't see anything if there actually was a dog or anything like that. But what it is believed is that he was taking her out there to bury her where pets had previously been buried. It was like their little pet cemetery. And that's what her family believes. They don't believe that this grave was out there for a dog. They believe that he was going out there to bury Tiffany to hide what he did. And what's super horrible about this is Tiffany's father told me she never wanted to be buried after she died. She had a fear of that. That was something she was really afraid of, like the earth and the bugs. So her family ended up cremating her. They didn't bury her. Her father said that he couldn't complete what Todd started by actually putting his daughter in the earth. Now, the prosecution said they were going to be appealing the judge's decision, obviously, but in this moment, Tiffany's family believed they were going to have to relive this nightmare of a trial all over again. Her father, John, was like, listen, it's taken us 5 years to try to move forward, to heal, to try to move on with our lives in any way that we can. And now this is happening. Something that we were told would never happen, something that was impossible, is happening all over again. And her stepmother, Karen, was like, this guy wants to get out and have the opportunity to live life again when he literally stole Tiffany's from her. She has no life to live. Like, how can this happen? They were amazed to learn that, like, if you look at it legally, he was no longer a convicted murderer. He could get bond. He could be released. How do you deal with that? And then to know that they were going to have to deal with the trial again, to hear all the details again, to see all the photos again. Her father, John, said of this quote, "My family having to go through this again, it is pure hell on the victim's family." But as I said, the DA was going to appeal the judge's decision to the Georgia Supreme Court. And they did. They appealed. And then in 2020, the Georgia Supreme Court actually overruled this judge's decision. So basically, I read the whole rejection, and the Supreme Court seemed to agree on some things, like the fact that the initial defense attorney not calling for a mistrial was an error, but other things they disagreed with. They said that any competent attorney would stop their client from being cross-examined about when the injuries to his neck occurred, when he himself said that they were from an altercation days earlier. And they added that the jury likely wouldn't have bought this provocation defense for the same reason. He said nothing happened that day. They also pointed out that a competent attorney would want to stop an emotionally unstable witness from being on the stand, and Todd had proven to be just that. So it was rejected, and he is still in jail, where he belongs, which finally gives her family, Tiffany's family, a real chance to heal. And they find peace in the fact that Tiffany is no longer suffering. She's no longer in a situation where she's being continuously hurt and abused. She can be at peace. Her family has also made a point to go to every domestic violence march they can find and any events that Safe Homes puts on to show their support for other women in this situation, to not just let Tiffany's murder be in vain. And they miss her. She's missed out on so much. They don't get to see her grow up, go on to have a family, be happy, have her own kids. She doesn't get to meet her nieces, her nephews, and her nieces and nephews don't get to meet their aunt. Tiffany was cremated, though, as I said, and her father keeps her ashes near him at all times. They're in, their urn, and they're with a display of other things that remind him of his daughter. And when I was talking to him on the phone, he's like, she's literally like right here with me. And Tiffany's sister Bonnie wears some of Tiffany's ashes on her neck, and she says that sometimes her kids will like play with the necklace, and she feels like that is Tiffany trying to get their attention and like spend time with her kids, which is really all they have, right? Because her life was stolen. I am always so defeated when I cover cases like this of domestic violence, because you see the same cycle play itself out over and over, and these victims have such a hard time getting out, and they're in such a dangerous and manipulative situation. And then to see like the lack of compassion and the victim blaming that you always see in cases like this, like, why didn't you just leave? Obviously it's not that simple, otherwise somebody would, and it just breaks my heart. These people hide in plain sight. Abusers often don't seem like they're abusers to other people because they don't abuse their victims in public. And it's a really tricky trap. The physical abuse doesn't begin all at once. It takes time. And by the time the victim has been broke, they're trapped and isolated from their friends and family. And the abuse doesn't just affect the victim, right? It also affects their family and their friends. They've been cut off from their loved ones, and these people don't know why they've been cut off, but they sit there and they have to lose hope that their loved one will ever just leave. It just wears these people down to not be able to help, to not be able to stop the violence, and then you have guilt from not being able to help. But at the same time, the person in the situation has to choose to leave. You can't force them to leave, and that's a hard choice to make because they're in an abusive relationship. And then when they do, when they finally try to leave, we see time and time again that they are murdered. Tiffany was one of 128 victims of domestic violence in the year that she was murdered, in 2012. 128 in one state in 1 year. And that's just far too many. So hopefully with telling these stories and giving people ideas what to look out for, and somebody hearing the story, we can make that number smaller, we can chip away at it, because nobody deserves to go through what Tiffany went through, and no one deserves to lose somebody they love to violence like this. Now I want to end this video with a quote from Tiffany's sister Bonnie. She said of Tiffany's story, and I quote, "Different people have come up to us and said, because of Tiffany's story, we left our abuser. We didn't go back. And it does our heart good, but we still miss our Tiffany." And with that, my friends, is the story of the tragic murder of Tiffany Salter. I hope you found this to be informative and that my presentation of it made sense. And of course, I just want to thank you for remembering Tiffany with me today. Now, considering everything I told you during this case, I want to revisit the question of the day, and that was this. Do you believe that the sentencing in this case was justice? And do you believe that Todd Goff deserved a new trial? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. Before you leave, don't forget to leave me a comment down below with whatever case you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases, and whenever you leave a suggestion, I add it to my list with your name next to it so I can give you a shout out if I cover it. I like looking into the cases that you guys suggest, as this one shows, because they're often cases that I haven't heard of or cases that need more coverage. And of course, I know you're filled with good ideas and good taste, otherwise you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, and I'd love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically, you. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below for your convenience, along with a link to my membership where you can get early access to non-sponsored videos, priority comment responses, things like that. And I'm so sorry if any of you heard me crack my knuckle. I know that's triggering for some people. And now with all that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday. And I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.